This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have James Turk on the show. He is an author, executive coach, and the CEO of the Turk Group. He's also the author of The Giving Game, which we're going to talk about a lot today. And he's a self-diagnosed geek in behavioral science, so that's pretty awesome. Anyway, with all that being said, James, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into executive coaching, and why you decided to write The Giving Game.
Oh, sure thing. I could talk about this for a couple of hours. So my career path was very non-linear. So I, arrived in the executive coaching, consulting, learning and development space through, art consulting, working in the galleries. I worked on Wall Street, for, a couple of the big banks, and, worked in human resources, and then, various, roles there within, benefits and, employee engagement. And then, spent some time as an actor and did some soap work and all sorts of things. And then at some point it led me, a couple of decades ago to, doing some freelance work in the training space. I was pursuing my acting career after having a full corporate experience, and I was living in New York, and I was like, you know what, I think there's more that I want to do and say than just kind of do roles that up to that point were very administrative in nature. So I kind of pursued my first love, which was the theater and the stage. And while I was pursuing that, I had a really good friend's mother who was head of sales for a very prestigious learning and development consulting company. And they had sold this big piece of work to Home Depot, and they essentially needed these two out to all these different Home Depot stores. And she's like, I think you'd be great at it. Just look at the facilitation guide as really kind of staging direction, and it's a role, and, really haven't looked back since.
Awesome. And what was your favorite, I guess, experience going into those Home Depots and kind of going through the story?
I liked all of it. I like people, and I like the challenge of just figuring out okay, what's different about this store versus that store. What we were doing we were working with store managers so that they could support their employees in using this new, essentially, financing tool. So when they were talking about oh, look at this nice new refrigerator, would you like to purchase it? And here's this great, basically, payment plan. So it was all that. So all of that was really intriguing to me. The whole idea of equipping the managers and informing them so they could inform the employees, and so the employees could impact the customer. So I loved all of that. Really ended up where I am today through this idea. I've really benefited by the generosity of others, and we'll talk about the book a bit later on. But I wrote The Giving Game really as a way to just acknowledge all the goodness that I benefited from other people, but then also to a certain degree to provide, a gift to people who are new to people management and or just at that place where they don't know what exactly they're supposed to be doing. At Home Depot, I got exposed to some of those people. They're all very nice, but some are like, I don't know what I'm doing. I certainly don't know how to coach my people, et cetera. But that was just my first taste on just what the impact would be, and just a little bit of just behavioral science. Okay, these things can be, what you say and how you say it matters, both from an employee perspective, and if I'm trying to influence a customer's behavior toward purchasing something, you can, do that deliberately also. And at the time, that was all, very eye-opening to me.
Yeah, sometimes it seems almost like magic. But For me, I feel like every time you take a step up in your career, you get to that point where you don't know what you're doing. And you almost have to feel like, I remember the first time I had a one-on-one, I had no idea how to do a one-on-one because my previous boss had, the one I took his spot, he had never had a one-on-one with me. So I didn't know what I was doing. But I'd heard somewhere probably on, YouTube or podcast or something somewhere that said, hey, you need to have one-on-ones. So I said, oh, let's have a one-on-one. And it didn't go very well, but I got better at it.
There you go. Exactly. Well, I think as, new managers or just as people, and for me early on in my, pursuit of becoming, facilitator, executive coach before I started the Turk group, I would book these gigs and it would be for like a big consulting company and it would be like topics that I had like a working knowledge of, but I certainly didn't feel like an expert. And I was so overcome with the, the imposter syndrome. Like they're going to know. But I contracted with myself early on as a result from good leadership and management that I had been the recipient of earlier, that fear wasn't enough of a reason for me not to do something. So if I didn't feel well or like there was some other reason, sure, but it couldn't be that I was just nervous. I had to hold myself accountable for like just kind of working through that. And that served me well. It allowed me to get through a lot of really, you know, in retrospect, tough situations and really just kind of like learn the space and really give myself a chance to actually get better at it. And you're right with the one-on-ones, by the way. One-on-ones can be very, very tough. No, Google's Project Oxygen. And in that research, they talk about like of all the things that people managers do, having a good one-on-one is typically going to be the biggest return on investment for them because it just gives you a chance to get to know your people, give some feedback, talk about career progression, and all the things that really matter when if I'm trying to kind of enable good behaviors out of my employees.
Yeah. So let me ask you something that you kind of hit on just briefly. You talked about fear, and that's one of the things that I found talking to hundreds of people on the show is that one of the things that hinders people or holds people back sometimes is fear.
Yeah.
And, you said that you couldn't have like the fear be a reason enough not to do this. But some people, they find it is a reason enough, but it shouldn't be. How is it that you can help people get over those fears? Like whether it be fear of speaking, fear of, stepping up into a leadership role or just fear of doing the right thing?
It's a great question. So it falls into emotional intelligence. So just really making sure that, in our kind of training programs and certainly through my coaching, we talk a lot about the importance of emotional intelligence. We usually refer to Dan Goleman's work, and he talks a lot about these kind of like four lenses and, kind of two spaces all around awareness, self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, social skill. And for me, it really starts with just having a good, just good self-awareness. So just really being able to kind of honestly understand what's happening with me right now, right? So am I confident going into this meeting or into the situation? Do I have nerves about it? Am I somewhere in between? Am I just not comfortable with the industry, the people, the content? So just having a very honest assessment of kind of like where I am. That's kind of table stakes. Once I have that, then going into kind of self-management, self-regulation, that's where I can come in with some specific tools. And there's a lot of tools out there, right? So some of the things we work with is there is this idea of the kind of, four considerations, and it's a tool from, if you ever heard of The Secret, which is a kind of the visualization, manifestation kind of practice born out of Southern California, but it talks about these kind of like the four intentions. And, as I go into this situation, let me think of it in terms of like, how do I want to feel about this situation at the end of the day? How do I want the other party to feel about it? And how do and then how do I want the other party to feel about me? And how do I want the other party to feel about themselves? Right. So say I'm going into do like an executive offsite and I've got a lot of nerves, which side note still happen to this day, even though I've been in the space for 25 years. And I'll kind of manage myself, say, okay, I want to walk into this session and I want to feel good about myself. And I want to feel good because I've done my research, I've practiced, I've thought through what it's going to look like. And I've put a lot of time into kind of making sure that this works. And I want to feel good about this client, that they are kind of open to my ideas and they're kind of like, they may not agree with me, me, but they're receptive, and I'm delivering things in a way that is kind of clear to them, and it empowers them to either kind of make the decision I need them to make, whatever those things are. But I also want them to kind of, have a positive view of me. Like they can, disagree with me, but like, you know what? We don't like anything this guy James is saying, but he seems like a good guy. He's smart, and he clearly did his homework. And I want them to feel good about themselves, to where they would reflect to say, like, you know what? I'm glad I work for an organization that allows us to have this type of conversation, allows us to hire someone like James to come in here and help us run the business. So if I kind of look at it from those four perspectives, they're all positive, right? So my goal isn't like that they buy the product or that they see the world the way I see it, but they just, it's just positive. Like it's a positive experience for me, regardless of the outcome. So that's one. So that helps a lot. And then, as I said just a second ago, just a lot of just practicing. So kind of pen to paper, what's the big fear? What's that born out of? Is it like, is it just noise, or is there some like, did you have a bad client meeting a couple of years ago that's haunting you? So just digging deep. And if you move a muscle, you change a thought. Right. So if I can get into it and understand it and practice and give it some sunlight, typically it's going to minimize the negative impact of that fear and other stuff. But it's a good topic, and it's real. Like it's fear. Even when I coach CEOs, fear is one of those universal truths. No one gets a pass.
Yeah. For me, and I know for me, I have like these automatic negative thoughts that come in my head where I'll automatically go to like the worst case scenario of things. And I have to, consciously stop for a second and kind of play it out and say, okay, well, let's just play this out, this worst case scenario. What happens if it is the worst case scenario? And let's walk through that. And then how to recover from that. And then that gives me confidence to know that, okay, even if it is as bad as it can be, I can, fix it and move on. So
totally. No, that's great. And that's, in the book, The Untethered Soul, it talks about just observing our thoughts and then not changing who we are. And, the neuroscience is the neuroscience, and our brains are wired, whether it's like nature or nurture, it's kind of in there. The key is just to understand it and then be able to recognize when you need to not action something, and then also not exhaust ourselves with what you just described there, John. I so relate to it. And for a long time, I wouldn't kind of change the channel soon enough. And I would just just exhaust myself with it. Right. Versus understanding what was happening. And then earlier on, just saying like, let me change the channel. This isn't productive. This isn't in service to those kind of four considerations I just mentioned. So let me try to get out of this space.
Yeah. Good idea. Good topic. So tell me about why you decided to write The Giving Game.
So I said it a little bit earlier. So, throughout my career and throughout my life, I just have benefited from others' leaderships and professional opportunities that were all kind of built on this idea of, it's a giving game, not a getting game.
Right. So generosity.
This idea of, if it's the mindset is like, what can I bring to the city versus where is mine? So that kind of overarching kind of vibe and idea really started in my childhood. I was born and raised in Mississippi. I'm the youngest of seven. My parents, we all grew up in parochial schools, and I've got some issues with some of the dogma and specifics. It's all about a life of service. So it was kind of built in to what we did. My oldest sister is developmentally disabled. So kind of her care and kind of putting her needs first was kind of part of how we lived. So this idea, and my parents were both sports coaches in addition to working. So there was a lot of sacrifice to kind of, help the local teams. So I kind of observed it firsthand, like as a kid, kind of the way we were raised. And then early in my career, I've just been really fortunate. I've worked for some people who were wonderful people, not particularly good managers, but I've worked for some people, at critical moments that saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and they took chances on me, and they made a choice to go with me versus a different resource. In a very kind of generous way that not only kind of, allowed them to get what they needed, capable resource, someone with a good attitude, but a big time gave me what I didn't even know I needed. So a couple of examples. So when I was, In school, I got a job working for a gallery in Chicago, art gallery in Chicago. I had interest in art, but I'd never really done it before. This couple took a risk on me, and they were like, they were looking at people who had a lot more experience. They took a risk on me, and then they developed me, and then they just kind of taught me this whole industry and about sales and really running a small business. And then once I got to New York, and I was on the corporate pathway. I mentioned this guy, Bob Sherwood, in the book, and Bob was someone I had left Wall Street and I moved to trade publishing in human resources. I was, definitely too junior in my mind. I was too junior for the role that I was interviewing for. Somehow I was making it through these interviews, and yeah, I'm sure it's some like nerves and the Southern charm, whatever it was. I had some charisma, but I made it through these interviews, and I made it to the interview with Bob. And in my mind, I just botched this thing. I was like, "Oh, this is," but he was a nice man. I'm like, "All right, well, that went well." He was very polite. So I left thinking that I botched it, but he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. So I got that job. And then once I got the job, he, didn't just like let me figure it out. He made it a priority to just kind of, find opportunities for me to like learn the right things. The role that I was in really required the employee population to get to know me very quickly. I was in a kind of I was a benefits administrator, and I supported 1,300 employees, and they needed to know who to call and who to talk to. So he made that happen, and he started the process of teaching me how to be a public speaker. So he had me go to the sales conference, and I was a nervous wreck, and I didn't want to do it, but he kind of innovated, and he could have gotten other people on the team to do it who probably could have done a better job with it. But in this like giving game mindset, he's like, no, I see something in this kid. I'm going to spend the time. I'm going to develop him, and I'm going to kind of give him this chance. And I went off and did it. Wasn't terrific, but I got through it. But I kind of learned a valuable lesson, and that really began my whole journey into essentially what I do now. So all those things were kind of percolating inside me. In the Turk Group, which is the company that I own, we work with client organizations all over the globe. Leadership development, sales, leadership, offsites, like all sorts of programs. A common thread through all of the clients and sessions we do for them is management development. So really developing people to be people leaders, and the majority of those is really helping managers who are new to the role, right? So either they got promoted, or they've been identified as being kind of a high potential, or they've been in the role for a long time and they've never received the training. So I was like, well, and this book was percolating, it's like, well, if I was going to write a book and I wanted to kind of pull forward what I, benefited from, and I was going to try to like help clients and, an audience that I know just, all the research is pretty clear, like, they need help. What would that look like? So, all right, I'm going to write this book, and it's going to kind of walk through the first year of being a new people manager, and some things to do, some things to avoid. So that was kind of the idea of the book.
Nice. And I know a lot of people when they write, books like this. When I first got my first like kind of executive role, I read a bunch of books about like your first 90 days in CIO, your first 90 days as CTO, and all these things like that. But you seem to emphasize on the first 45 days. What's so important about that?
Well, so like the Watkins, who wrote First 90 Days, I loved it. I went through versions of that, way back when. I think the world has changed, quite frankly, and I think that we're just the pace of change, the pace of work is just like it's a different animal now. So with the first 45, certainly what I see in our programs, and certainly what I see just in the coaching, is there's just a higher expectation that managers are ramping up much quicker. So it's a little bit of like, you got to hit the ground running right now, because organizations are flatter than they've ever been. There's more kind of, change that's happening than ever before. It's constant. So, there's really no time to kind of have a very kind of like thoughtful and kind of a slow 90-day ramp up. So, I looked at like what was most important based on kind of the questions that we get, and just kind of laid out like, in the first 45 days, essentially the first 6 weeks, what do you need to do? And the first couple of weeks are all around get your head in the game. What's the role? Who are the key players? Align yourself with your manager. Check out what's happening with your team, get to know people, don't make any major decisions, just kind of get your head into it. The second couple of weeks is broaden that out a little bit. So in addition to your team, now start thinking about dependencies. Who does your team partner with? Who do you hand work off to? Vendors, senior leadership, start having some conversations. Also in that third and fourth week, start thinking about, based on what you observed in the first couple of weeks, are there some changes you can make? So go a little bit deeper into your one-on-ones, career aspirations. Do they want to change the time of the one-on-one? So Watkins talks about this idea of like a quick win. So a version of that. So look for ways. I talk about it in the book. Is this idea of like look for ways to add value. So that third and fourth week, look for ways to start adding value. So could be big, could be small. And then weeks 5 and 6, now that you are a month into role, you kind of have the lay of the land, the key people. Now you want to start kind of thinking about like, looking at the vision for your team, your mission. Why do you exist? Start put some like language around that. Use that language to kind of inspire the team. Kind of socialize that with other people in the organization. Think about your own kind of personal brand and things of that nature.
No, I think that's really good. I think that's where a lot of leaders kind of fall short with those key things you talked about right there at the end about how you add value and putting language around it.
Yeah.
And I got really lucky, I think, when I first became a manager. Well, at first I kind of sucked at it. I've told that story many times before, but when I got a mentor and he kind of like helped me, really see things, have that self-awareness that you talked about earlier, because I didn't really have that. I saw things, out of my eyeballs and my lens. I didn't see the lens that people were looking at me through. But once I had a mentor that kind of pointed that out to me and helped me out that way, I realized that I needed to kind of codify the things that we are doing on our team. And even though at the time I was only managing 5 people, so there were 6 of us total on the team, I wrote up like well, I call it our code, the tech code. And our whole team kind of spoke into it. We talked about it. We made adjustments to it, but it was those core values that helped make decisions for us whenever we were in a bind, that were our, mission statements going forward. And I've used those same code, and modified it and grew it over time, for the last 15 years. And so it's one of those things that as my team gets bigger and I have, hundreds of people reporting to you, you now have your code kind of modified and changed a little bit, but it's still that same core that's important to you and your team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and I think that's amazing. And I think that, we talk a lot about kind of building a high performing climate, and climate is essentially, when we talk about culture, typically it's like organizational culture. When we think about climate, for us, it's more kind of maybe department level, team level. Essentially, how does it feel for me to work for you as my leader, right? So is it a good day or not such a good day? What you just described as far as like the code, the more that and we have a way that we think about climate, that there's really 6 dimensions with climate, and each one of them, I can dial things up, dial them down, depending upon the climate that I'm trying to create. So if I'm in a highly regulated environment, I might need like a lot of clarity and a lot of standards and a lot of like guardrails, because there's no room for error. If I'm in, say, a creative agency, I may want fewer of those things because I want innovation, I want ideation. But to your point, having standards of, behavior, group norms, how do we make decisions? How do we disagree with each other? The more that we can define those things, it is really a tenet of psychological safety, the better the results are going to be. Employees can orient themselves into like, okay, this is the context and this is how we're kind of playing the game, so they can do the work. And then as a leader, it gives me definition that I can hold people accountable to.
Yes, absolutely. And I read a book a long time ago called The Accidental Creative by Todd Henry. And in that book, he talked about how if you truly want to have creative solutions to problems, think within your box, not out of your box. There's that cliche of thinking out of your box, but if you have the boundaries in place, it's almost like putting bumpers on bowling. You have these bumpers, you can just bounce the ball around and you have a much better chance of being successful.
Exactly. And the ball is still moving towards your goal, right?
Right.
And
Still going forward.
They hit the gutter, but that's okay. It's still directionally going in the right way. I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Getting into like climate versus culture, what do you mean by climate when it comes to like, how it is working for a team or a group versus the culture of, because when I think of culture, I always think of like the Netflix culture guide and things like that, grander scale.
Well, I'd say so. Culture is usually kind of formed by like the founders or like part of
Mhm.
like the larger purpose of the organization, the mission, all of which is great. But and the culture could be so say it's a like BlackRock. So the culture there is it's aggressive, right? So I'm stereotyping, but like there are some stereotypes, but there's a reason behind the stereotypes. Once we get to climate, it's going to be more around kind of like within all of that, and it goes a little bit into the research from First Break All the Rules, like why don't people do what they're supposed to do? They don't know what they're supposed to do. The more that I can kind of provide clarity to them around kind of why our team exists and how we are going to kind of do it in the more micro, that's typically how people are going to experience me as a leader. So am I going to be, do I provide feedback on a regular basis? Do I have, a compelling mission for our team, even though technically I'm not required to do so, but it matters. And I want to give that to my team so that they have some direction around why we exist and how we're supporting the mothership. That would be climate, right? And then, the idea of, how does it feel for me to work for you? When we think about some of the, better managers we've had and some of the maybe, not so effective managers, if all else is falling apart out there. So I'm working in an organization. It's a you know what show. I'm gonna keep it clean here, John. I have this you know what show. But I like my boss. There's clear direction on what I'm supposed to be doing, how I'm going to be measured. I get feedback on a regular basis. I get to learn something new. I get to work with some people that I respect and enjoy. We have a little fun along the way. If everything else is the same, compensation and the like, I'm probably going to stay put, even if the wheels are falling off like the larger plane, because in a micro level, I'm okay. And it's really about my experience with my boss and my teammates.
I think I've seen that, play out firsthand so many times, in both directions. Like I said, when I was first a manager, I kind of sucked at it. I had people quit. I had high turnover, and it took a mentor telling me that no, they're not leaving to go to the banks in Charlotte to get jobs. They're leaving because you micromanage them. You don't give people freedom or autonomy. And so those kind of like stories had to hit home, and and it really hit home when my mentor told me, he's like, would you leave for a 10% raise if you loved your boss? I'm like, well, no. Well, then they don't love their boss. So think about it that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we say it in kind of in like one of our programs where it's just kind of cheeky, but we're like, like one of the icebreakers is like, all right, so just to get your heads into this topic, reflect back on all the people who've managed you, and who were the one or two who were just exceptional. What is it they did? What was the impact, et cetera? And then the debrief from that is always like, all right, who didn't make the list? All right. So if you're, then we like take it further. Like if let's assume this is all going to go well, and one of your people is going to be promoted in the next couple of years, and they're going to be in this class, and we ask them the same question, we want you to at least be competitive. So that's what this is all about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd say the competitive nature in me wants to be, at the end of the day, when someone, moves on, whether they get a job and they go somewhere else, or I move on, I want them to think back and say, John was the best boss I ever had.
Yeah.
And the way that I do that is kind of, doing what your title says, is to give into them, is to invest into the people however I see fit, or however I can,
Someone told me, I forgot who it was, but at some point the idea was implanted in me that I should always be whoever's on my team when I worked kind of full time for other people. Whoever's on my team, I should be grooming them to take my role. My goal was always to make myself, my role, me in my current role no longer needed. So to kind of set me up for like what's going to be next. But I was always kind of like, getting the people behind me ready for kind of stepping into my role. And that stuck with that really kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I heard something similar. I was told that if you ever want to move to the next higher rank, you have to have someone to backfill you. If no one's there, then we can't move you up, So yeah, I absolutely see that. How what else can people, look for when they want to, or, be a better leader in their first 45 days or the first year of management? Because a lot of our listeners are in that, transition period where maybe they're a team lead and they're getting ready to get into management and kind of up their career, or maybe they're managing a small team. They're about to be moved up, or they're hoping to be moved up to be a director or, C-level?
Well, I think for me, a big part of it is just kind of managing their brand. So just understanding that, as they transition into the role, the classic is most people end up in a leadership role because they were technically very good at their job. And, conventional wisdom is, they'll be technically, they can manage a bunch of people who could be technically as good as they were. And that may or may not be the case. So as they move into the role, just think about how they want other people to experience them. So, a big part of that, back to the emotional intelligence, is kind of just know what you're walking into, right? So, it's absolutely okay, and nor is it expected of you that you're supposed to know everything. So, just as you're kind of building your capabilities as a leader, a big part of it is, just knowing what you don't know. And especially if you're moving into a situation where you have a seasoned team, that gives you a chance to not only kind of connect with them and kind of engage them, but also kind of let them help kind of inform you and just, be super transparent and honest. Brene Brown talks about like the power of vulnerability. Being a new manager is a great opportunity to do it. Like, you know what? I'm so glad I got the role. I need to be honest with you. I've got mixed feelings about it. I'm excited, but I'm nervous. As it relates to how I'm working with you now, I've got lots of questions and I'm going to be learning tons. And as I am, doing that, I'll probably come to you and check my thinking, and, I'm open to feedback along the way, but I'm looking forward to figuring this out. If I'm the employee, I can support that. Right. Versus like, okay, we're doing it this way. And, how they saw like someone doing it in a movie, like, how do you, build your brand, be authentic. It's okay not to know, but just show that you're trying and that you are kind of moving forward to kind of figuring stuff out.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think whenever you're honest and transparent and tell people like, I don't know, I have no idea what I'm doing in this role, but I want to figure it out, and we're going to work together. And I need you as my, number two, or I need you, to help guide me because you've been here before. Help me out,
Yeah.
And I think people are so much more receptive to that than someone who pretends to know.
Exactly. And I also like that. I heard this with one of my clients about 10 years ago. And she was amazing. She was a biotech company, and she was the head of sales for a franchise. And she would always say, James, it's important for me with my people to, especially as I am kind of seeking their guidance and opinion, that I shoot straight with them. And she's like, so I tell them, I ask myself, is this a me decision? Like, or is this a we decision? So if I'm going to my team to say, I want you all to kind of weigh in on this topic, she's like, I'm upfront with them. Just like, I need you all to weigh on this topic to try. I've made my decision, but I need you to try to influence, or I haven't made my decision, and I want to hear from all of you as I formulate my decisions. But she's like, I've got to be clear what I'm going in with. Like, is it ultimately going to be my decision, or is it truly going to be a we decision?
Yeah, because that can definitely backfire if you go in there and they think that it's a we decision, but it's really a me decision, and your mind's already made up. And this is the way it's going to be.
Spoken from a man who sounds like he's been on that side.
Been there before, yeah. Especially when, I had this idea where I really wanted my team to do something for themselves. Yeah. So I gave them options, but unfortunately, I didn't really want to give them options. I wanted them to do it this way, and they chose the other way. And luckily, it was something that wasn't as big of a deal, and I was able to okay, I need to step back. And it was actually a learning thing for me because I realized that I didn't have to do it my way, and it worked out just fine. It might not have been as efficient if it was my way, but I didn't have to do it my way, and it was just fine. And someone else was able to make that decision and learn from it. And in the reality, I got to step back completely away from it and focus on something else, which helped my team scale. So,
yeah, and I think like creating space for learning that and giving, you got to give time. So it's like people, we're impatient, but like you ask questions, bounce back. You're gonna make mistakes. It's okay. And just create, also look for community. So you're like new managers, you're not alone. There's lots of people like you got the Giving Game, lots of other books, lots of like forums where you can talk about these things. Probably talk to your manager at some point. They were a new manager also. I would, as you're kind of getting to know them the first couple of weeks, I would ask advice. Hey, what did you do when you were a brand new manager? What was some of the mistakes you made? Any advice for me? kind of in this company, in this role, but like, also, from when you were a new manager, what did you learn? So again, they can connect around that. It creates like a shared understanding, and then also kind of lays the ground for what would be just a good partnership moving forward, which you want as a manager. You're not on an island, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having support, having groups, having people around you that you can bounce ideas off of is super important. And, it doesn't have to be at your job either. It can be in your industry. It can be in your church or somewhere else, anywhere else. There's always a support group. So
Absolutely.
James, this has been great conversation. I really appreciate it. How can people learn more about the Turk Group and the things that you're doing over there, and connect with you online and maybe pick up a copy of your book?
Absolutely. All right. So there are a few different ways that you all can connect with me and my team. So website is theturkgroup.com, and there you'll see case studies, a bunch of videos of me talking about different topics, including a link for the book, and that will kind of pull you to Amazon and you can get your copy. LinkedIn is always a good spot to kind of check us out. And if you follow us, we're pretty prolific, and we publish some white papers and some other things there. So it's probably the two best ways. And please buy the book. We think it's good, and just good opportunity to kind of refresh. So the audience, as I said earlier, were people brand new to role, people considering going into leadership, and or the very large number of people who have been doing it for a long time and are still kind of winging it. So this is for you too.
Yeah, awesome. And anybody that's interested, I notice that there's also an audio version as well. So
we had the Kindle audio version. We did it all.
Awesome. And I'll link that too in the show notes at geekleader.com, so people can go there and click through as well. Again, James, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.